first things first, who is SWCTech? I know a number of folks that are in attendance and or will be in attendance for this. Some of you know who SWCTech is. You might be our clients, but there's a great number of you that are not. So we wanted to take a second to introduce ourselves. We are SWCTech Technologies. We are located in New Berlin, Wisconsin, which is just right outside of Milwaukee for those that aren't familiar. And we were founded in 2004. I'm reading off the screen. We believe all companies have the potential to grow when they embrace evolving technology and an IT team who puts relationships in the future first. We try not to sacrifice future decisions by budget constraints today. We always want to put that first foot forward. We do everything with a lens through cybersecurity first. So security is in our DNA. Since we've been in business, all the way back in 2004, we've lost 0 bytes of any client data. So we are, trying to always be great stewards of your data. That is the lifeblood of your business. It's our job to protect that. And through our Net Promoter Score that we deploy through different key intersections and general times throughout the year, we've been able to achieve what Net Promoter Score refers to as world-class customer service for our field, which is in information technology. Some accolades that we're fairly proud of here at SWCTech as we continue to grow. So our presenter today is Matthew Travis. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the CMMC-AB, and his accolades list is pretty long, so I'll do my best to sum it up and introduce you, Matthew. But first things first, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Accreditation Body, also known as the CMMC-AB, is the nation's sole authorized provider of cybersecurity certification credentials for the Defense Industrial Base, also known as the DIB. It is chartered by the Department of Defense, known as the DoD, but independent from it, CMMC-AB is a 501c3 nonprofit organization working with thousands of companies that support the DoD to implement common and verifiable security standards. So Matthew Travis is the Chief Executive Officer of the CMMC-AB, and he was previously the first Deputy Director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA, for those that are familiar. It's the nation's leading civilian cybersecurity agency. There he oversaw the day-to-day operations of the 2 billion, 2+ billion, and 2,000+ employee organization across the full range of its mission in cybersecurity, infrastructure, protections, and emergency communications. I apologize if I'm short of breath because I'm still getting over a cold, but it's a lot to cover. So prior to this position, he was the Deputy Undersecretary for National Protection and PPD within the Department of Homeland Security. And before entering government service in 2018, he served as the Vice President of Homeland Security for Cadmus, the Security, Energy, and Environmental Professional Services firm. A former naval officer, Travis served as an engineering auxiliaries officer aboard the Guided Missile Brigade USS CAR, C-A-R-R. And he then served a tour as White House liaison to the Secretary of the Navy and was also White House military aide. He's a 1991 graduate of the University of Notre Dame and holds a master's in national security studies from Georgetown University. I got to say, Matthew, I'm very excited to have you guesting with us today and presenting on this topic for CMMC. With that, I will let you share your screen. And as you're getting that prepared, I want to just kind of show what our agenda is. These are the titles of your slides. So we're going to cover disclaimers, what the accreditation body is, what the responsibilities are, what the internal review process looks like for the DoD CMMC, what are the proposed changes for CMMC 2.0, the revised version of that model, a self-attestation, the interim process, the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for CMMC and what's on the horizon. And then we should be able to wrap up for folks to allow for anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So as questions come up as Matthew is presenting, feel free to throw them into the chat. We're not going to answer them as we go, but we will get to them towards the end. So that'll give us a good opportunity to address what those questions were.
Eric, thank you so much, and good day, everyone. Good to be with you. I really want to thank the entire SWCTech team for the invitation. I am always excited to talk CMMC and now CMMC 2.0 to interested parties. So whether you're a member of the Defense Industrial Base or actually a member of the CMMC ecosystem already, this is a good time to us to talk through the change in the CMMC, and as Eric mentioned, what's on the horizon? What does this all mean for the future? And so really, I prepared some slides that I'll share here, but really just to help drive the discussion more than anything else. Here we go. Can you see that, Eric?
Yes, I can. Yep, you're all set.
And I will certainly want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. And as Eric mentioned, he kind of did this disclaimer. I'll reinforce it that nothing I say here today should be construed as representing official policy or position on the Department of Defense. We are an independent organization. We have an exclusive contract with DoD, a no-cost contract, but we are the exclusive partner with the Department of Defense to implement CMMC. I'll talk a little bit about kind of what we do, but I'll stress here that we are not the policy-making body. We have a role to certainly help advise and work with DoD. When we talk about the CMMC rulemaking process and all the proposed changes in CMMC 2.0, those were inherently governmental decisions, and we really exist to help support the department in implementing CMMC, but also we do a few other things. So just inherent in our name, and which is a mouthful, America, I don't blame you for being out of breath trying to talk about the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Accreditation Body Incorporated. You know, the AB is kind of how we refer to ourselves. But we accredit those third-party assessment organizations, those C3POs. These are the organizations that actually are going to conduct the assessments of DIP companies. And just to step back, in case there are some new folks to CMMC in the audience, CMMC is the unifying standard for cybersecurity measures to be deployed and implemented, maintained throughout the defense industrial base. So if you think about what our adversaries are doing to us in terms of digital compromise, whether it's in North Korea, it's much easier to penetrate the networks of defense companies than it is the Department of Defense and Military Services. So weakest link in the chain is always going to be industry when it comes to security. And so the department, after many years of trying various measures to self-attest or to acknowledge a term and condition in a contract, that wasn't getting us there. So CMMC is a regulatory conformance regime to ensure that defense contractors and those companies that support the defense industry who have controlled unclassified information or federal contract information are implementing basic cybersecurity measures. So that's what CMMC is. We're the accreditation body that accredits the assessment part of that, as well as we certify the individual assessors and instructors. So CMMC itself as an ecosystem, it involves the consultants and the coaches and the trainers. We register those, we certify the individuals, and then we accredit the organizations. We also kind of oversee the ecosystem and kind of run the marketplace that connects assessors to companies and instructors to students and what have you. So pretty big role. We're a small group, growing our staff of 7 employees right now. I think it's important when you talk about CMMC, everything essentially changed since November 4th. The department, when they announced CMMC, we'll call that CMMC 1.0. That was what we were all working towards until the new administration came in the spring and said, hey, I think we've been hearing from industry, we've been looking at this, I think we might want to change some things. So essentially from April until October, the department did an internal review that sought to accomplish a few things. And streamline the CMMC model itself, make it more accessible, make it less complicated, but also ease the cost burden to industry, especially small and medium-sized businesses, and address that the scalability. I'll talk more about that, as well as instill greater trust and confidence in the ecosystem to make sure when companies spend their time, their energy, their money to engage in CMMC, that they know they're going to get a fair shake, and that everyone's going to be treated the same, and that there's a rigorous policing of ethics and conflicts of interest. So that's what the internal review has really sought to achieve. And so if you're familiar with the old CMMC model, the new CMMC model is going to look a bit different. So what I wanted to do is just spend some time to kind of walk through what these changes are, and then talk a little bit about the insight that some of the drivers and some of the implications and ramifications for these changes that I think will be on that horizon. Previous CMMC model had 5 levels of the maturity model, 1 through 5. It's now been tightened up to be 3 levels. Now levels 2 and 4, as you see down the bottom of that page, Those were never generally designed to be assessed or audited. They were, again, stepping stones for companies who may be starting with very little cybersecurity maturity to work their way up across or up the maturity model. Those have been removed, again, to simplify it. So now we have three levels. And the first level has been changed. Rather than being assessed by these third-party assessment organizations that I mentioned, the C3POs, that's going to self-attestation. I'll talk a little bit of that more here in the next slide. And then there's also be some self-attestation in the second level, which used to be level 3, now level 2, and that's where we envision most of the activity in terms of certification assessments taking place. I'll talk more about why, what's the driver there. And then level 3, which used to be level 5, was always intended to be for the larger defense firms, the primes, the big integrators who have a more kind of complex and sophisticated CUI footprint within their networks, that this is the highest level of certification. That will be, not entirely done by government. There's a government role in conducting those assessments. So 5 levels to 3 is probably the big change. And then the other thing that you probably heard, that what used to be very specific CMMC practices that were on top of the NIST 800-171 standard have been removed. And that again was driven by a desire to make the standard more accessible, more streamlined, and frankly, I think more adoptable by other parts of the federal government, even by international allies who have expressed interest in adopting the CMMC model. So when you look at the new model, again, level 1, which deals with FCI, so this is federal contract information. The government, the department decided to revert and make this a self-attestation level, primarily because they didn't believe that the risk assessment that they did of FCI warranted the cost and the effort to actually have third-party assessments to certify. When you think about FCI, it's kind of, not as viewed as important or critical as CUI. And in an effort to try to make, ease the cost burden, as I mentioned, level 1 was deemed to go to self-attestation with some caveats. It can't just be your IT administrator or even your CISO who attests. It's going to be a senior company officer, the president, CFO, maybe a board member who's going to attest that the company, the DIB company, is meeting all of those 17 practices in level 1. And so I still think there's a real role for these companies to engage in the CMMC ecosystem to avail themselves of the expertise within what we call the registered practitioners or RPOs, the registered provider organizations, to help them when you're testing, that you actually know what you're testing to. And if you read between the lines on some of the language that the department has put into the Federal Register, according to some attorneys who follow CMMC, it sounds like the False Claims Act is now in play, and using the whistleblower practices to police this. If I were a CEO or a senior official in a company, I would certainly want an external set of eyes helping me before I'd self-attest it. So I still think there's a role in that for the ecosystem. And in fact, one of the things we're going to be exploring with DoD is whether or not we can allow the C3POs to go ahead and offer level 1 certification, even though it wouldn't be required. So if you think about these level 1 companies going to have to attest every year, that's an annual self-attestation requirement. If you go ahead and get certified, that gives you 3 years. So we'll be exploring that with the department. On level 2, probably most of the commotion was over what's this bifurcation, meaning half of, or not half, but they'll be, depending on the criteria that's derived, and DoD is still working on what that criteria is going to be. Certain contracts that have CUI at level 2 will be deprioritized to be self-attestation, at least for now. This is generally a mechanism to help manage scalability. In the old CMMC 1.0, if those of you familiar with it, there was a pilot phase concept in which each year X amount of contracts would include CMMC requirements up until we get to end of 2025 into 2026, when ostensibly all DoD contracts with CUI would have CMMC requirements. That was the plan in 1.0. What's been proposed for 2.0 is to go ahead and take that universe of level 2 contracts, and those contracts that have what would be considered probably more pressing or more critical CUI, those type of weapon systems, the war fighter, kind of military operations, would be prioritized to go ahead and get certified. And those contracts are maybe more administrative in nature, or the example that DoD used at a town hall last month was, if someone's making boots, that's probably not as a high priority as the DIB company that's making avionics, right? This still all has to be worked out in terms of how that bifurcation is going to be managed. But again, the driver is that we recognize there won't be enough assessors or C3POs to do the assessments until the ecosystem is fully mature. And so if rulemaking ended tomorrow, we wouldn't just have enough capacity to do all these level 2 companies. So this is really a prioritization to manage capacity until which time I think the department won't need to bifurcate when we have the full complement of C3POs out there. The only thing I'll say about level 3, which again is the highest level of the maturity model, there will still be a role for the C3POs to go ahead and assess those companies and certify them at level 2. And then the government, through the DIBCAC, which is the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, they'll come on top of that and do the final assessment of the NIST 800-172 controls. So it's still a kind of a level 2 certification with NIST 800-172 on top that the government will do. And so that's, those are really the drivers on why they went to this model. And I think it's still a very compelling, it maybe not be as much of a multi-level maturity model as the other one, but I think it's cleaner. And again, it makes it more adoptable by other government agencies. I mentioned those practices that used to be unique to CMMC have been removed. The other new element is that POAMs or POAMs will now be allowed. That was a point of contention with CMMC 1.0, which was really more of a pass-fail type of a regime, in that if you did not have all of those practices fully mature and demonstrated as much, you would be at risk of just not passing with no POAMs. Now, for certain practices, for certain requirements, time limited, probably to 180 days, companies will have that time to kind of shore up certain elements of their CMMC conformance to get it to where it needs to go and won't necessarily fail. So I think that was welcomed by industry. There will also be waivers on a very limited basis, and the department hasn't said much about this. I suspect these would be for very narrow, potentially sole source manufacturers of critical components that in the interest of the government, waivers could be granted. But I wouldn't bank on waivers. My understanding is that these will be very limited in use and only granted in unusual circumstances. So those are some of the additional changes. I just touched on this before. I think it really distressed, though, that some companies, I think, they took away from CMMC 2.0 that, I'm off the hook. I only have FCI. I'm going to just have to self-attest. This is CMMC isn't in play anymore. I don't think that's the case at all. And I do think, as I said before, that those companies who may just have FCI only required to self-attest at level 1 or in that part of level 2. I still think they're going to want to seek assistance from CMMC consultants and coaches to help make sure that self-attestation is done confidently and done accurately. And again, I think we'll be exploring, at least at level 1, the opportunity to get self-certified, which will give you 3 years as opposed to 1 year of clearance with the government. Most importantly to us, I think, at the accreditation body was the government's acknowledgement that many companies have already invested in CMMC, been waiting to get started, and the CMMC 2.0 changes are going to making. So those of you who've been following CMMC, you know that the interim rule was developed and then introduced in last November, so over a year ago. And then, while the interim rule still has the force of these are in effect, nothing's final until the final rulemaking is finished, which never occurred with 1.0. So now that the department's implementing changes, we got to go back through another round of rulemaking. That could take anywhere from 9 to 24 months. And I know, especially all of you outside the DC area, you scratch your head, how changing some rules take that long, and just the vagaries of the federal rulemaking process are what they are. But the good news is the department's not going to make everyone wait 24 months to get going. They can't mandate CMMC until rulemaking is completed, meaning the department can't put CMMC requirements in any of your contracts or any of the contracts of your prime contractors until rulemaking is finished. But in that time, the voluntary interim program will be authorized and stuff, meaning those companies who are ready to get certified can go ahead and get certified. It'll be under the CMMC 2.0 standards, but those will be as good as, those will be solid, valid certifications. And the department is looking at incentives to encourage DIB companies to go ahead, don't wait, and go ahead and get certified. Don't know what those incentives are going to be. There's still a lot of work to be done. I'm sure the lawyers will have a say in this, but you can think in terms of either financial assistance, points on a tech proposal, profit percentage points on a cost proposal, maybe CPAR's consideration in terms of how your contract performance is evaluated if you get certified during the period of performance. I think there's a lot of different things that the government could put in to make it more enticing for companies to, don't wait for your contract to require it. Show that you're investing in cybersecurity, walk the walk, talk the talk as a defense industrial base member, and go ahead and get certified. So we're excited that we won't have to wait too long before we get this stood up. What we're doing now is that we've got to change all the documentation from the old CMMC 1.0 to CMMC 2.0, some other administrative things, but I'm hopeful that assessments with those authorized C3POs that are already ready to go and those DIB companies who are ready to get certified will start in early 2022. What does this mean in terms of the department has announced 2.0? We have talked about the way forward here. I still think on the challenge side, there's some scalability concerns that certainly we have in that it's going to take a while to get the ecosystem in a place where, if you think about how many companies are on the defense industrial base, it's a large sector. You probably heard some of the estimates that I have heard, 300,000 companies. Whatever it is, it's a big sector. And we're going to need a lot of C3PAOs to do these assessments and a lot of individual assessors to go work for those C3PAOs. On the individual side, we've got a pretty good scalability framework in place. We have over, I think, 70 companies who have signed up to be official CMMC trainers to train assessors. We've had 20 educational content publishers who are on board and already developing the CMMC curricula. And then we partnered with Scantron to administer the nationwide exams for the CMMC assessor profession. The X factor is whether or not there are enough Americans who want to get into the profession of being an assessor. I think it's going to be very lucrative. You look at some of the other conformance regimes out there. If you talk to an appraiser at CMMI who does it, and not even full-time, part-time, I think you can make some pretty good coin being in a CMMC assessor when this is all up and running. But the labor market's tight right now, so I'm just hoping there are enough Americans who want to get into being an assessor. But we've got the trainers, we've got the content developers, we've got Scantron to do the testing. We just need enough people to go ahead and take the classes. Those classes have started. So that scalability on the individual side, scalability on the C3PO side really goes through DoD, and that they're the ones, along with us, who are assessing those C3PO themselves. And the throughput right now is not where we need it. So we'll continue to work with the department on that. I think another challenge is momentum. Some of you who have been following CMMC since its inception, might be kind of looking at your watch, saying, hey, let's get on with it. Obviously, the internal review and the changes proposed in 2.0 are going to take more time. And so one of my concerns is to make sure that people don't lose interest. And what I've tried to stress is you can take advantage of this downtime to go ahead and get your company ready. Employ those coaches and those trainers who are out there to help you get ready for CMMC. But once we get assessments going, I'm hoping the momentum really does pick up. And I think there's a lot of outstanding questions still to be answered by the government, especially with reciprocity for other conformance regimes. Some companies have already had 800-171 assessments by the DIBCAC. Some are ISO 27001, FedRAMP, especially as it pertains to MSPs and CSPs. There's more clarity that's needed there. So I think we owe industry more fidelity on what that reciprocity environment is going to look like. But on the opportunity here, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for CMMC to really be what I'll call the coin of the realm of cybersecurity within not only the defense acquisition world, but all of the federal contractor base. When you think about the threat, and as Eric said, I came from DHS, from CISA, and every day I had to get briefed of the intel. those countries, Russia, China, and North Korea, and those global cyber criminal syndicates are hitting us every single day. And every day they're becoming more creative and more sophisticated. We have to build this culture of cybersecurity within the defense industrial base that is taking the initiative, leaning forward, and making these investments to bolster their cybersecurity environment within their own networks. We can't look at this as, I'm going to do it because the government's making me do it. We need to recognize that all of us have to manage digital risk. And one of the things I hope that CMMC does is bring in the C-suite to become more familiar with the requirements. Some of you who may be CISOs or CIOs, you might not always get the full attention of the president, the CEO, the CFO, the COO when you talk about, hey, we need to make investments for cybersecurity. Their eyes might glaze over. Now that, at least on the self-attestation front, they're going to be required to get involved. Hopefully that'll help foster better understanding of what that threat landscape really looks like and build that culture of cybersecurity throughout the entire defense sector. What we want to do at the accreditation body is really create a market demand for certification, and that it's almost, if you don't have CMMC certification, you're going to stand out as a company that's not taking cybersecurity seriously. That then those who do, they're going to have that CMMC certified badge on their website. You're communicating to your clients and customers, to your employees, to the government, and to your competitors that you got your act together. You're running a tight operation that manages digital risk responsibly, and it's not unlike I think in the residential security world where whether it's ADT or other companies, those homes that invest in physical security for their house generally have that sign in the yard as a deterrent. And I think the CMMC badge tells cyber criminals, it's going to be easier to go elsewhere than to try to hack into my network because I'm CMMC certified. That's not going to happen overnight, but certainly you're going to hear more from that, from the AB, to foster that type of sentiment throughout the sector. We do hope, as I mentioned before, that CMMC gets adopted by other departments and agencies throughout the federal government, if not state, local, tribal, territorial governments, and industry or international allies as well. We know other companies were in active dialogue with DoD to adopt CMMC. Member countries within the Five Eyes, Britain, Canada, what have you, France. We expect DoD to resume those talks and see if we can make this the international standard for cybersecurity. I also think there's an opportunity to help small businesses make these investments and improve their cybersecurity. I think small, medium-sized businesses were very vocal during the internal review and during the rulemaking process, recognizing that, hey, this is non-trivial what the government's asking us to do. We can look at the standards and say, hey, these are all the basic blocking and tackling of good cyber hygiene. And I believe that they are. I don't think we're asking anyone to, to acquire quantum computers and do all sorts of fancy stuff. If you look at those domains and the controls, it is basic cyber hygiene. But that notwithstanding, certainly for small businesses, it can be a significant cost, not only to get the assessment done, get certified, but just to prepare for it. And so we're looking, now that we're a 501c3, recognized by the IRS, we're in a position to accept charitable donations from corporations who I think have been waiting to get involved and help small businesses. So hopefully, as we move forward, the accreditation body will be able to announce some initiatives to help small businesses with CMMC. So I think there's a lot of opportunity on that side. And I apologize, a leaf blower just showed up in my neighbor's yard. So if that noise is carrying through, Eric, I apologize.
It's okay. It's not too loud.
Okay. On the horizon, and like I kind of hinted to this, that we're going to be working again, whether you're already in the ecosystem, whether you work for the company within the defense industrial base, we want you to engage with us to make CMMC successful for you. So we're certainly going to be more vocal in stressing the value of retaining the services of those trainers and coaches and consultants who can help you prepare for CMMC. Talked about developing that culture of certification as a market differentiator. Don't wait for the government to make you do it. Let's go ahead and get on the path to getting certified. And then for all these changes that we talked about in CMMC 2.0, we recognize we've got to update the training modules and make sure that all of the assessors and all the students certainly going through the classes are up to speed on what those changes are. Within the accreditation body, we'll be announcing here in early 2022 a rebranding of sorts. If you looked at our logo, it's very much, it was based in the early days on the DoD mark, which means we can't protect it, and it confuses people whether or not they're looking at the program management office or they're looking at the AB. So you'll see a new logo, a new branding from us here in 2022. That'll enable us also to make our new credentials more secure. The digital credentials we'll be giving out will not be able to be replicated as they are now because we have no IP protection on our mark. And then also a new website that we are engaged in right now that'll have enhanced functionality, and that marketplace within CMMC will be much more user-friendly and much better able to connect companies with RPs and RPOs, assessors with C3POs, and really help everyone get engaged more quickly, more efficiently than ever. Again, I'm sorry about this noise here. I'll, one thing I want to stress, and I'll happy to go to Q&A, is that we want to make sure that we're being responsive to you. And I do think in CMMC the good idea window is still open. We're just because we're in rulemaking, that whole process has public comment periods. And we're certainly on, daily, really daily discussions with DoD. And so extending those ideas to us, sending what you like and don't like, that'll all shape how CMMC 2.0, what it looks like when it comes out on the other side of rulemaking, hopefully later next year and not in 2023. I would hope that goes quickly. So that's why I wanted to tee up, Eric. A lot of changes. I'm sure there's still more, questions. And as I said before, I can't answer the DoD specific questions. I'll certainly try to, provide any insight, but I'll have to qualify that if it's a purely DoD policy issue, I'll probably have to defer. But with that, Eric, I'm happy to open it up.
Thank you. Well, if folks that are still tuning in, if you want to pose your questions here, I'm hoping that there are some questions. I'd love to, bend your ear while we have it. It's not often we get to speak to someone, as I've been saying, get it right from the horse's mouth to some degree. One of the questions was, where can the curriculum be located for those that are eager to learn more about how to deploy CMMC 2.0? You mentioned this curriculum or this training module where folks can kind of learn how to approach it. Is that something that's going to be available on the new website, or that's something is available currently elsewhere? So
those 2.0 materials are not available yet. Those are both the department as well as the accreditation body. We're working on updating all the documentation. I want to be clear that there's really two things that we're talking about. We talk about kind of getting folks trained up. There's the formal training program for those individuals who want to be assessors, who want to work in CMMC. And that gets into how to assess the CMMC practices, the whole assessment process. The NIST 800-171 gives you what the standard is, but it doesn't really tell you how the standard should be implemented. That's where the CMMC assessment guides, the assessment process, the scoping appendix, all that documentation, that's what the curriculum to train assessors is. But those are also documents be available to DIB companies, to what we call those organizations seeking certification, available to them to go ahead and get prepared for CMMC. So we'll make announcements when those are ready. The department had put a 30 November kind of milestone to try to get those that documentation revised. They had some staff illnesses and some other setbacks, so I think we may have another week or two before DoD has finished their editing, and we're working to finish our editing as well. So once that training materials are out there, we'll certainly let everyone know.
Thank you. A couple more questions did come through, so I'll phrase them up to here. This one might be related. So where could a person interested in becoming an assessor find more information about that pathway?
Yeah, great question. Our website is CMMC-AB.org, and before you click on there, I'll caveat it, it's not a very impressive website. It was stood up very quickly in the early days by our voluntary board of directors, and God bless them for that. As I said, the new website's coming, so don't be deterred by the very modest functionality. But you'll see there the pathway to becoming and Assessor. There's an application process, so essentially you're going to apply, and then essentially you'll be taking a class from one of the licensed training providers. So like I said, classes are offered all across the country. They're offered online. You get to pick who you want to take, from whom you want to take the class. And I think for the CCP, and again, the CMMC terminology can be a bit tricky. I try not to use too many acronyms because it's confusing. As I've said before, someone told me when I first joined in April that explaining CMMC to a colleague is more challenging than describing blockchain and Bitcoin to your grandparents. And so we're trying not to use too many acronyms. But that entry level of the assessor profession is called the Certified CMMC Professional, or CCP. Everyone's got to start there, and that's, I think, generally a 5-day course that you'll take from a licensed training provider. There will then be an exam, and that is not offered yet because we're changing. They have to change the exam questions out for CMMC 2.0. But that'll be available later in 2022. And then there'll be other steps, other seniority steps on being an assessor. And so it's like other conformance regimes. There's different levels of expertise and different credentials to be in the assessor profession. But to start out, you go to our website, you can see who's offering the classes, then you apply to become a student and go from there.
And I'm sorry, and one of the other questions that followed up on that is when would that be available? Did you say that would be available in 2022?
No, the exam is, the classes have started now. You can go ahead and get the classes completed. They started teaching the classes in October. And so the question comes in, well, if you're teaching CMMC 1.0 in October, what are you doing now? So we are updating the curriculum, and we'll be offering that kind of that Delta training to those students free of charge when that's finished. So they'll be required to, take another module, but it won't be charged to them.
Okay, great. Another question did come through. So the question is, will the certification be for both DIB system integrators and/or both cybersecurity vendors? Does that make sense to you?
I'm not sure, but let me take a stab at that. Right now, CMMC is geared for those companies to get certified, who support the Department of Defense through contracts. They may be their own prime contractor, they could be a subcontractor, but CMMC is going to apply to all defense contractors who, as part of their support, deal with controlled and classified information or federal contract information. And get a lot of questions about, well, what is CUI and what is FCI, and admittedly, the government is not always consistent on how it marks CUI. So one resource I think is a good starting point. If you're not familiar with CUI, you go to, I think it's dodcui.mil, and they've kind of got a tutorial website to help companies better understand what we're talking about when we're talking about controlled unclassified information. I think it's dodcui.mil. Again, we're not talking about contracts that deal with classified information. That's .CMMC, and those defense contracts that might not have any CUI or FCI theoretically would also not be covered by CMMC. CMMC is for those defense contractors in the DIB that are dealing with CUI and FCI, and it doesn't matter if you're providing, again, PowerPoint slides and as a support contractor in a DoD program, or you're building airplanes and ships. So it's a very wide scope in terms of types of companies that are going to be dealing with CMMI. I imagine in Wisconsin, you get a lot of manufacturing in the Midwest, and so those companies may actually have CUI on the shop floor, right? We're talking about design specs and mill specs, as opposed to purely kind of, administrative support contracts. So, but everyone who has those contracts is in scope. But then also, when you think about it, so many companies use MSPs, managed service providers, cloud service providers, other companies who hold their data. And so if you're working with a partner vendor that is access to your CUI, then that's going to increase the scope of how you get assessed. And one of the things that we're encouraging those cloud service providers and managed service providers, if they're not FedRAMP certified already, and I won't go, if you're not familiar with FedRAMP, that's essentially a cybersecurity conformance regime for cloud service providers. But you have to have a government sponsor, and it's a very limited group. There's no prohibition on MSPs or CSPs to go ahead and get CMMC certified themselves, even though they don't have necessarily contracts with DoD. They're supporting those companies that do have contracts, and any company can get CMMC certified.
Great. The other question that just came through, and I won't hold you to this, so we're not going to quote you per se, and I would ask for maybe some sort of general range, but the question is, what will the cost associated with getting a CMMC level 2 be? Is there any sort of general range to what that could look like? Obviously, some companies are smaller than others. I've talked to companies that are, sub 10 million. I've talked to companies that are 100 million plus. There's a pretty big spectrum that exists there if they're holding that CUI data or information, if they need to go down this path. Some of the questions have been, even that I've been fielding, are what is this going to take to do?
Yeah, very relevant question, Eric, and I'll try not to punt too much of it, but I always have to be careful on not trying to influence market conditions. And so I don't, the cost of a CMMC, so when you think about cost, if you're a DIB company, right, there's the cost of actually implementing the CMMC practices. You've got to have either your staff, their time, there's an opportunity cost, and putting into place whether there's technology solutions and documentation procedures. But you also may likely want to hire an RP and RPO to help you. So you may choose to pay for consultants or a trainer or coach to help you. And then there's the cost for the assessment. I take it, Eric, your question was geared towards what's the assessment going to cost. And I'll say a couple of things. The cost of the assessment is largely going to be driven by how many man hours it's going to take to conduct that level 2 assessment. And so one of the things I encourage DIB companies to think about is take a look at your own environment, your own networks. Where do you have CUI stored? Is it bounded neatly? Is it organized? The more that you can shape the boundary of where you store and who has access to CUI and FCI, is going to make the assessment much easier and more efficiently be able to be conducted. So if a C3PO comes into a company and they've got CUI everywhere and their documentation is everywhere, and the scope it's going to be a larger scope, more time, more effort to do the assessment, as opposed to a DIB company that's like, okay, here is where our CUI is, here's all the documentation. So I think that's going to be a big factor controlling costs. Ultimately, we're going to let market forces prevail. The government's not going to set any price ceilings or price floors. It's going to be an open market environment. Right now, there are 5, soon to be 6 authorized C3POs in the marketplace. Now, that means they've passed their own level 2 assessment and met all the requirements to be a C3PO. We haven't authorized them to conduct assessments yet. That's why I talked about having to revise the documentation and do a couple of other administrative things. But they already have clients lined up. The DIB companies have already approached them, those 5 companies, and in some cases signed contracts to go ahead and get certified at now level 2 once we give them that authorization. And I've heard numbers bandied about in terms of the costs. I don't have any firsthand data. We don't ask the C3POs what they're charging. That's between them and the DIB companies. But the more questions, or the more companies that get into the marketplace in terms of C3POs, there's going to be a natural cost competitiveness to drive costs down. The other thing that we're looking to do with the accreditation body in the new website is have functionality that's very similar to a TrueCar, where if right now if you want to buy, or if you're some other companies offer a similar functionality. If you looking to buy a car, I'm going to buy a Ford Fusion. I want it blue. I want to have a manual transmission. Yada yada yada. You plug it in. You're getting you're getting essentially quotes from car dealerships in a 50-mile radius or what have you. Similar to CMMC, we'd like DIB companies to be able to go onto the marketplace. I'm a company of this size. I'm looking for this level of CMMC certification. Just some other facts. Here's where I'm located, and then have those C3POs then have to bid for the work. I think the more market dynamics we can introduce into this, Eric, that's going to be a big driver of pushing the cost down.
I think you did a good job of answering that. I don't think you punted too much at all. So thank you for that, because there's a lot of components to cover there. Certainly, there's a lot of things to consider. So I believe you answered it. I don't see any other questions that have come through as of right now. That was all of them so far. If you do have questions, you feel free to submit them. If there's some that we don't get to, obviously, Matthew, your information is being shared on the screen right now. Is that available for anyone to email questions in, and that's okay?
Yeah, it is. I struggle with email sometimes because, but I think the other email that I should put on there is CMMC support at CMMC-AB.org. I probably should have had that one up there as well. That actually gets automatically. We have a ticketing system, so there'll be a control number. We'll make sure people get a response as opposed to my inbox, which relies solely on me. But happy to set up calls. Want to make sure that we're accessible. I still have a return call list that's pretty long, but we want people to engage. We know there's a lot of questions. We know that there's still some anxiety in some corners about cost, about whether it's going to affect me. And I would just, leave you, Eric, with that sentiment that I think I touched on, which is, if you look at the threat landscape, especially over the last year, it was just about a year ago that SolarWinds got compromised, and then we had Microsoft Exchange, and we had Colonial Pipeline, and the list is long. When you think about the kind of country we are, 150 years ago, we were an agrarian nation, then we became an industrial nation. We're an information nation. And you think about all that relies on our digital networks, not only within the defense industrial base, but just throughout society with the advent of 5G, autonomous vehicles, quantum computing. Cybersecurity is not going away. And CMMC is a good forcing function to get companies to recognize this. And sure, you can wait for the requirement to show up in your DoD contract. But if you really think about what you value in terms of, as a business, how important is your data, forget about, just for a second, the importance of DoD, which gets to the whole, why CMMC was created. Think about what it means to you. And if you think about how important that customer or client information is, your proprietary intellectual property information, your PII, that personal information, identifiable information, your PII for your employees, privacy concerns, there's a lot there that you're going to want to protect. And if you look at the CMMC practices, which are really now 800-171, those go across what I would consider very reasonable but very effective basic cyber hygiene. And to me, that's enough right there to go ahead and jump in and get this done. Get certified, show the world that you take it seriously, and don't wait for the government to put it in your contract as a requirement.
It's a great final thought. There was one more question. I'll ask the question, but I'll echo what you're saying. Even if you're not doing any work in the government supply chain or with the DoD or the DIB, certainly this is a standard set of practices that you can deploy to be cyber secure. So, it's still a best practice. It's still going to increase and improve and highly strengthen your security posture as an organization. And given the threat landscape that you'd mentioned, it makes a lot of sense to have some standard or some governing body to look to or towards to make these and inform those decisions. Obviously, so this brings me to the question then. We work primarily as a sub to primes on non-DoD contracts. How concerned should we be about CMMC?
Well, right now, in terms of concern, I'll infer that the use of the word concern means that someone's going to make me get CMMC certified. I wouldn't be surprised, even in the non-DIB world, just general prime contractors might start encouraging, if not down the road, requiring their subs to go ahead and get certified. Because it's a tangible, demonstrative proof that you've implemented these measures, as opposed to just saying that we do cybersecurity. So if I'm a prime contractor, I would certainly be giving thought to going ahead and encouraging, or over time, eventually requiring my subs to do that. But in a non-DoD world right now, in terms of a regulatory environment, the only thing on the books right now is DoD getting to the point where this will be required as a matter of contract law. But if you look at the news, you hear what DHS talks about, other government agencies, GSA. Again, I think if you get titles, what's on the horizon? I think on the horizon is that you're going to see an adoption of CMMC by other parts of the government at some point, if not international ministries as well. So I think it's a matter of time before this is going to be considered something you need to do. It's novel right now because it's so new, and but ultimately, it wouldn't be surprised if this continues to be adopted by other parts of the government contracting world.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time today, and I appreciate everyone that was able to make it and attend, and thank you for the questions. Hopefully those questions were answered. Just as a heads up, we will be sending out, I believe in 2 days, we will be sending out this recorded version of this presentation. So for anybody that wants to watch it again, or obviously I'm speaking to people that aren't here, but for those that couldn't make it, they'll be able to consume it as well. And I think what we'll also do is take some of the resources that you mentioned towards the tail end here and put those into some sort of communication as well, so folks can have the ability to find some of that information, those resources that you had mentioned, as well as that email address that you'd provided too.
Eric, thank you. Thank you to the whole SWCTEC team, and very appreciate the time to talk to your partners and clients today.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.